The biggest hurdle that yoga teachers face is their fear of public speaking. I think that's the biggest hurdle that we all face. I've met so many people, really talented people that know loads about yoga, that want to share their passion with others, but they're trapped by fear. And like a lot of us, we let that cripple us. We can't get over that hurdle. This is why I have Gerry Duffy on the podcast. If you don't know who Gerry Duffy is, he's a professional motivational speaker, goal-setting coach, and a writer. He's written 3 books. And I came across Gerry when a kind listener recommended his work to me, who had actually been to his workshops. This was based on a podcast I did a few weeks ago on advice to yoga teachers, and saying that I wanted to speak to someone who is a public speaking expert, which Gerry is. So like any hurdle, sometimes we think it's too great to overcome. And Gerry is a true inspiration because, I mean, the guy has done, we didn't talk about this at all actually, he's done 32 marathons in 32 consecutive days. And then from that, well, you'll learn more about this when you listen to this podcast, so I won't spoil it for you. This podcast is brought to you by 2 lovely people. The first is The Nature of Things. They're our sponsor. They help with the podcast to keep this going, as do you guys. The Nature of Things provide beautifully crafted essential oils. I met with their founder, Benoit Nicole, back in earlier this year. And if you're a yoga teacher and you're burning incense, we don't know what's in that stuff. Plus as well, if you burn incense, it actually, I find that people start coughing sometimes because it makes the air a little bit smoky. So if you want to make your room, your yoga experience smell nice, then get yourself some essential oils. But when you get your oils, let them be the purest form possible. And the best people to go to that I've experienced are The Nature of Things. If you go to thenatureofthings.ie, fill your basket with any essential oils that you like, and maybe choose out a diffuser as well, or a gift set for a friend. You can use the promo code YOGALIFE, that's YOGALIFE without the, for 10% off all products. And this offer is valid from September 1st to October 31st. 1 use per customer only. The other people that help us with this podcast are Small Changes. Organic, eco-friendly whole food store based here in Ireland. There's no online offering, so if you'd like to go in and buy yourself some produce that's going to help look after the environment and look after yourself, check them out. They're in Drumcondra, Dublin 9. If I have no events left apart from the workshop, that's my retreat's done. There's soon to be a new retreat announced very soon, but my workshop is coming up on December 14th, Sligo and Salt and Soul, Heels Overhead. There's about 16 people booked in so far. We're going to take maximum 30 in total, maybe a little bit less than that, so everyone gets some enough attention. And if you'd like to join that workshop, you can go to their website, saltandsoul.ie, and book online there. So let's stop me rambling, and I'll bring on Gerry now. If you enjoyed this podcast at any moment, you can share it with a friend on your IG stories. You can also leave a review on iTunes. Any stars you choose would be much appreciated, but 5 is always optimal. And feel free to let me know if you've got any questions about this. I plan to get Gerry on again because we had tons to talk about. My mouth was just open, my eyes were wide when I was listening to Gerry speak, so I hope you get as much from it as I did. So without further ado, here's Gerry. Hey Gerry.
Hello.
We've started. How's it going?
Tremendous, thank you.
How's your water? How's your water?
Delicious, yeah, very clean, thank you.
You're welcome. Gerry, why is public speaking a scary thing? And is scary the right word? I'm getting straight in there, deep end.
Sure, yeah. Certainly for me it was, because I don't have a background originally in speaking. In fact, I was very far removed from being a full-time speaker as I am today. But I think it's my research, and when I researched it and then examined what it was like for me, I saw great alignment in what the research told me, and that is that it's a fear or it's all centered around a word beginning with J, which is judgment. And that we feel that people are going to judge us based on our ability or our lack of ability, maybe to stand up and speak in front of a crowd. And for me, that manifested itself 14 years ago when I did my first ever formal presentation in front of a group. And I had 6 weeks' notice, and for 6 weeks I barely slept. And when I reflect on it now, it was all a feeling of judgment. What are people going to think of me? I won't be able to speak. I might be sweating. And what if words don't come out and they'll laugh at me or think, gosh, who's this guy? And I also realize now that all of my thinking, because it's part of what I teach now, is I was thinking for that entire 6 weeks, I made an error, and that was to focus on myself. And I've learned now not to focus on you, but to focus on maybe on the value or the benefit that you're going to give to your audience, or what's in it for them, and why might they be really lucky to hear or get the wisdom from you that you're going to stand up in front of them. And that's a way, I guess, maybe of distracting the mind to focus on something else, that you might feel, okay, well, maybe I can do this. And because whilst we're thinking about that, we can't be thinking about ourselves. So it's maybe a distractionary technique.
And I think, and that's a brilliant point, that we get so obsessed with ourselves, don't we? And I love something you said actually in another podcast, which I won't promote. But actually, I think I forget the name of it. Sorry, but you said something about being a leader is thinking of it as we as opposed to I. And the reason why I think this is so valuable and relevant to the people listening to this podcast is most people that listen to this are either yoga teachers or actually, okay, so a lot of them are yoga teachers, and therefore you're leading a class, you're leading a retreat, a workshop, or you might be doing a teacher training. But even if you're not a yoga teacher, Jordan Peterson said something brilliant, that being a good communicator makes every part of your life better. And I was thinking about this myself, about my relationship with my girlfriend, or my relationship with people that I teach, and groups that I lead. But specifically in the theme of leadership, why do you think it's important to differentiate between I and we in a leadership context?
I think one of the main reasons, there's probably 100 different answers to that, but one of the main reasons is when we're leaders, we're on a stage and people are looking up to us. And every word you say as a leader, it sounds different to a follower, because it's coming from maybe in the face of a higher authority. So every word gets magnified. And, leaders that I believe that use the word I a lot, that might just give me an inkling as to maybe that they're thinking about themselves first and foremost. Whereas, in leadership, it's not about me, it's about we. And I think if people are very conscious of our words as followers, it's just that all-inclusive language that shows people, listen, I'm in this, or they're in this with me kind of thing, And I think it's a much softer way, and I think people embrace it more. And I think, I'm running a session this weekend with a group of people, and it's a workshop that I deliver, and there's a gentleman who's coming as my guest. There's a particular reason why he's coming as my guest, and I spoke to him just a half an hour ago on the phone, and because he's kind of on the face of it, he's not one of the group because he's coming as a guest, and everybody else has made the commitment to be there through the channels that they've done that. And I just noticed my own language when I was speaking to him, because I said, listen, we have a great group coming. And, I was about to say, including you, it's 13. But my default now, and I was so proud of this because it kicked in straight away. I said, including you and I, it's 14. And I just wanted, my reason for doing that, I examined literally half an hour. Why did I use that word? Because I wanted him to feel a part of it. I didn't want to feel that he was on the outside of everybody else. And it just came to me, thankfully, I guess through working on my own leadership over the last number of years, I've become much more conscious of a need to use that kind of language. There's a simple example where I'd like to think now he feels a part of it and not somebody that's coming as an outsider, and he might feel as an outsider there. I want him to feel a part of it. So just that, including you and I, including us, it's 14 people.
But it's interesting. It's almost a process of introspection that you're having. You're asking yourself, or in that moment, you made that decision, that conscious decision to say you and I, as opposed to just this person. And I think that in yoga, the practice of yoga is one of introspection, to ask yourself when you're practicing, what narratives do you run in your head? For example, if you can't stand on one leg, what are you telling yourself when you can't do that? That you're not good enough? That someone else beside you is better? Or are you simply accepting that this is a process of learning and that there is no performance, and you're simply looking to examine your own thoughts? And when you're teaching yoga in that room, it's a hypersensitive environment. I've seen tears, laughter, everything, okay? And therefore, words are really powerful in that environment. And I'm conscious of this because I said to my dad's a carpenter, I was telling you earlier. My dad makes things, as what we're sitting in now, he built this. And so therefore, that's what he produces. Whereas what do I produce? What I produce mainly is words. And what I say creates action and creates thought. So I really think that anyone listening to this, especially if you're looking to be a teacher, you cannot underestimate how powerful the words you use are. And this is why I wanted to speak to you, because last week, 2 weeks ago, I asked on the podcast, I said, look, if anyone knows someone who's a public speaking expert, please let me know. I'd love to speak to them. And then someone said, I went to Gerry's speaking school and I'd highly recommend him. That's why I got in touch with you. But from what you've seen in terms of people who are, let's take, say, teaching as an example, as a profession, sorry. What examples could we be aware of that teachers sometimes fall into when they try to encourage people to learn that are, say, bad habits? So one is like for example, the thing of saying I. But I'm conscious of things like negative reinforcement. Now, I'm not an expert in this area, but is there any other narratives that we use that you think we need to be aware of?
There's lots, but there's one really big one in my book that I think really stands out. And I remember, a speaking colleague once upon a time asked me to just examine him at a talk and to examine his presentation, and afterwards to give him feedback. So we sat down afterwards, and he wanted me to be really honest with him. So he was going to speak for 20 minutes. So we sat down, I listened in the back of the room, and we went for a coffee or whatever it was afterwards. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, you want me to be honest? And he said, yes. And I said, you lost me in the first 30 seconds. And he said, why? And I said, because you told me what to do. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you told me there were only 3 things I needed to do to be successful in this particular thing that your presentation was about. I said, an audience, in my experience, doesn't like to be told to. They like to be, you share information and let them consider it for themselves. Because he was telling me there was only 3 things I needed to do to be successful in business. But my whole business, or my whole business life, or I could have, learned from my dad or my mum that there's only 1 thing you need. Who is this guy now telling me 3? Or I might think that there's only 2 things, or I could think there's 9 critical things to be successful in business. But who is this guy telling me that there's only 3? He hasn't earned my trust. He hasn't given me credibility yet. And so I put the shutters up based on that language. And he said, well, what advice would you give me? And I said, it only needs, as an example, 3 words in front of, you're quite entitled to that opinion, but just in how he presented. And I said, what about if you put these 3 words in front of it? In my experience. Yeah. And it has a whole different impact for the audience. And yes, as yoga teachers, we might be up there as the expert, but doesn't mean there isn't other experts in the room, as an example, or doesn't. I think the moral of the story is to allow people to make up their own mind. And you might say, well, here's a particular technique. Rather than saying, here's a technique you must use, you have to do this. Here's a technique I might recommend you do. Try this for yourself. In my experience, I think you might find this is a much better strategy in terms of whatever it is they might be trying to teach. So those words, I think, are incredible. The words we use when we're on a stage, and as yoga teachers, we're on a stage, without a doubt, every word we do is sounds different. They're interpreting it, they're filtering it, they're processing it, and they're making up their own mind based on how you communicate. So the tone of language that we use, I believe, is, if there was only one thing that I would share, having sat in hundreds and hundreds of presentations and been fortunate to deliver, and always trying to examine my own behavior and listen back to presentations I might have given and how could I improve it. I really do put all these things under a microscope. And so a simple example is, I was doing a talk this morning, and I even with I was encouraging note taking, but I shared it with people. I said, you decide what to write. I said, because I might share different things that will mean different things to different people. And, there was an exercise involved in it. And I asked them, could I invite you to do the exercise? I didn't tell them to do the exercise. I want you to do an exercise. Can I invite you? And I think it's a much more softer, respectful word. And I can only speak from my own viewpoint on this, I guess, and my own, it's just something I'm very strong in terms of my own values, just to invite people to do things. And then, I even say, listen, these are my experiences. I'm not saying you have to agree with them. I said, I'm just giving you my view of the world, and you decide, you process, you filter what makes sense for you, and allow them to make up their own mind.
But there is a thin line, a trap that I've fallen into before is one of self-deprecation. So I was teaching a masterclass the other day. I say the other day, it was about 3 months ago. And someone asked me I was basically promoting the class after a regular public class. And I said, hi, just letting you guys, everyone, next week we have a masterclass. And it was one of the first ones the studio was doing. And I said, don't worry, you don't need to be, they say the definition of a masterclass is talented students being led by a master. And then I said, I'm in no way a master, but you may be talented students. And as soon as I said it, I kind of regretted it, because my own insecurities came out a little bit, and I'm so conscious, or I'm so aware of what I'm saying, that sometimes I overthink it, but I also don't want to fall into underselling myself. And actually, I think that's why this phenomenon of podcasting is so interesting, because I've realised that people that come to, say, at the retreats I'm going to be hosting and my workshops, half of them listen to the podcast. And half the time in this podcast, I say things that kind of a bit embarrassing about me. And what is that phenomenon? Do people just, is it like it makes you more human, or what?
Yeah, well, I think there's maybe two examples of it. There's one where we're deliberately self-deprecating, maybe in a humorous sense, just to maybe get people to, see the viewpoint that we are the same. But there's also the viewpoint where somebody might pay us a compliment and we kind of don't take the compliment, yes, just through our wiring or our programming. And I can assure you, I've had a case to answer this myself, because it's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is just to, when somebody does pay you a compliment and you turn it into a negative comment, your brain is confused, and your brain, in my experience, is saying, okay, well, maybe I'm not worthy of this. Yeah. Instead of maybe, in terms of personal development, because it's something I've really focused on in my own life, is if somebody pays us a compliment, is at the very least to accept their opinion of us. And it might be an uncomfortable thing to do, but the growth in a person comes from maybe doing something that's uncomfortable, and that might be as simple as simply as accepting a compliment.
But it might be, do you think, Gerry, it might be a cultural thing as well? Because in Ireland, if you say to someone, I say to a lady, for example, generally, I like your top, they'll say, oh, €5 from Pennies. Not, which is Primark in London, but not thank you. But it's to downplay that. Do you think that's a bit of a, because I can't imagine, I'd say that's less likely to happen in America, for example. They might go, thank you, I like yours. Like when I was in the States, I remember, this is when I was 21, and women would just say to you, oh, you're cute. Jesus, and a natural reaction if you is to downplay that. And so do you think like this is a cultural thing there a little bit? Because you've taught, sorry to interrupt you, Gerry, but you've been outside of Ireland doing your teaching. So
I definitely think, in terms of Ireland, I definitely think we tend to be, unfortunately, quite good at it. I don't think we're born that way. Like, who's born that way? Who acts that way at 5 years of age? You know, if you go into a primary school and you go into the junior infants class and you pay them a compliment, they'll just smile and they'll beam. And whenever you go back at 10, maybe not so many will smile and beam. You go back at 15, maybe, no, it's not me, and they might deflect it. So I think something happens between 5 and 12 or 13 years of age, maybe, that doesn't happen maybe in, as you said, in the United States, where we do learn the value of just maybe putting a value a little bit more in ourselves. There's also an angle that it could be just deliberate self-deprecation in terms of just a value that we might have, just to not oversell ourselves, kind of stuff. So you could look at it from two perspectives. It's something that maybe would warrant improvement, but also something that's can be a nice, attribute of somebody as well, and it depends on what lens, I guess. It depends on maybe why we're having a conversation. But if it's such a thing that we're so deflective of it, and yet we're trying to grow as a person, well, maybe it's an area that might help us to grow to another level if we're willing to just put more of a value on ourselves that we might currently be doing.
But also, Gerry, you made a good point just a moment ago about it being given almost like a break of slight humour, because I find that in that situation, when I said I'm not a master, a couple of people chuckled, and sometimes it helps to ease a bit of tension. If you feel tension, you can, and also as well, it's but it's just something I'm conscious of. I mean, as I mentioned to you earlier, and again, this is kind of embarrassing to say, but before we started recording, me and Gerry were chatting, and I said that there's a part of me that likes to show off. When I was really young, I was a very good pool player. I used to go to the pubs. I've never talked about this before. It's not probably because it's not that interesting, but in this case study, it is. I used to go to the pubs and play pool. And my cousin Eamon, shout out to Eamon, I used to idolise Eamon, and I remember him commenting on how good I was at pool and that I could beat all the adults. And I thought, okay, this is something I'm enjoying, showing off and being really good at something. So there's an element of me that likes to show off, and therefore I like to perform. So luckily I do a job where part of it is a performance, holding space in a room, your body language, how you use your voice. But the point I made a few weeks ago on the podcast, which is why I wanted to speak to you, is that I feel, and I've seen people that love yoga, that know so much about it and want to share it, but it's almost like all that knowledge is trapped inside them, because either they don't want to address public speaking or they don't know how. But that was you once upon a time. So what was your journey? That's what we say in yoga, your journey.
Okay, my journey. I'll give you maybe a 60-second journey, I think.
Okay.
But funny, when you were speaking there, a quote, I have a lot of quotes embedded in my brain. And even reflecting on my own journey, if it was summed up in one quote or one recommendation or one piece of advice, it was from a man whom I hugely admire, a man called Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N. And some of your listeners might be familiar with him.
Yeah.
And he said, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And I thought that's such a powerful, because we can have all the technical or the academic or the yoga skills, but maybe if we're challenged by maybe our ability or our confidence to deliver it, I think that in many ways is what he's speaking about. Okay, well, what are the other skills that you might need to be able to get your inner voice out or get your passions out? And I remember working with a football team once, and we'd one particular player that he absolutely loved working in the gym, but the gym was the last place he needed to go. He was stronger than maybe 5 other players put together, but he didn't want to put in the hard yards in other areas. And it cost him in the long term, I believe, because I think it held him back, just his refusal to look at other areas in terms of technical or diet or whatever. But his thing was, but I'm in the gym, like, surely that's like, why are you trying to get me to do these other things? But in terms of my own journey, like 60 seconds, I do a lot of public speaking now. I'm a professional speaker. I speak probably 3 times a week, and 99% in corporate settings, sometimes in front of small audiences, sometimes in front of really big audiences. I speak about leadership and goal setting and public speaking. And But if I go back 14 years, I had my own business, but it was a completely different business. And as part of that, at that time, and maybe I really I knew I had a public speaking issue in terms of confidence and maybe some social, lack of social confidence, whatever. But this speaking presentation in that other business arrived at my door in 2005, where I had 6 weeks' notice. And for that 6 weeks, Kevin, I genuinely barely slept. It was probably the most difficult socially, or not socially anxious, but just anxious times of my life, where I just was hugely troubled in terms of my mindset. And the closer it got, the worse it got. But now I realize it was all about me. I was just focusing on me, which is a very easy trap to fall into. And I was so afraid I had to go to a hypnotist to speak to 4 people.
Right, okay.
That's how big the fear was. But I walked out of that room. There's another quote that I've heard, which is, if something doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. But it did challenge me hugely. And it changed me, because I walked out of that room having delivered that first talk and got the confidence from the growth, that I walked out, my mindset changed. I said, oh my gosh, that was such a brave, courageous, it took so much out of you, but you did it. And this was all in my head. And I walked out thinking, what else? If you can achieve that, what else have you been telling yourself you cannot achieve? Because if you can do that, you can do anything you put your mind to. Now, I had no desire to be a professional speaker. I was so relieved it was over. A couple of years later, my brother got married. He asked me to be best man. It was only marginally less terrifying, but I did it. And then I did some local talks, just in a business sense in my hometown where I had a business. And once I got through the fear, I actually began to enjoy it. And then in 2009, I just made a decision, which was to create a new business in the speaking world based on a bit like yoga teaching, where I felt I had value and where I felt I had expertise. And that's where I came up with the idea to do what I now am very fortunate to do.
Wow. Gerry, that was brilliant. Where do I go from there? That was so fantastic. Well, okay, confidence. Go on, Joe.
I was just one thing, if I might add. I feel I'm probably so much better now as a speaker than I was 3 years ago, 6 years ago, 9 years ago. But the reason, and this is a thing I would encourage yoga teachers or whoever, every time we present, and you share that you 3 times a day, you can do sessions. And if I speak 3 times a week, one of my goals every time I'm in front of an audience is to be able to prove to myself that I'm working to get 1% better than the last time. Now, that could be every session, it could be every day, or it could be every week, or it could be once a month, where I will challenge myself not to do what I did before at the same standard, but to get better. And for it to get better, it has to feel a little bit different. So I do this exercise with an audience where I invite them to fold their arms. I did it with a group this morning that were talking about, they told me they wanted to improve in their careers. So I said, can I invite you to fold your arms? And so they folded their arms. And I said, okay, how does that feel? And they said, it feels fine, it feels normal, it feels comfortable. I said, how would you know if you were genuinely on the path to growing yourself in your career? I said, what would that feel like? So then I got them to fold their arms the opposite way. And I said, how does that feel? And they said, different, awkward, uncomfortable, hard to get used to, had to think a little bit deeper. But that's the feeling that I believe we need. And if we get that feeling, we are growing. And if we're growing, we're likely to get more confident. If we get more confident, we're likely to be more motivated to go to a higher level.
God, that's fun. Gerry, you're so good at this. You're so good at this speaking business. Gerry, that is because that's what I say to. I try not to reference my girlfriend in every podcast I do, but I always do. She's like my confidant. God bless her. But I say to her, like, I'm never really comfortable. And I'm always not trying new things, but trying to see how could I said that better. And when I say something, I go out and even not necessarily even words, but at the end of a class, for example, people, I got to do my advice because mic. At the end of a class, people will come out of the room. Okay, so they're walking out of the room. I say, thanks for coming. See you tomorrow. See you next week, whatever it may be. And I realise, right, I didn't make eye contact with that person, or I looked down, or I didn't. If they're speaking to me, I didn't give them all the attention. So I'm always trying to get better. But I think that's what makes this craft so enjoyable. Because I have a desire to improve, and I know that I absolutely love doing this career, yoga teaching, and some people don't like to think it was a career, but it is, and I love doing it. And therefore I think, what can I do to be as good at it as possible? And it all starts from, I believe, how I communicate. Sorry, Joe. Sure.
Here's two things that because I'm so interested in this particular area of focus. So, somebody's saying, well, why would I want to improve all the time? Like, have a good business or whatever. But a couple of things on it that I feel very strongly on. One is if you have a business where you want it to be and it's bringing in revenues or whatever you want, and you keep improving that, what's likely to happen in your business? You become more attractive to your clients. So the business is likely to grow, so that's one reason. There's another reason that I believe it's in our interest, your interest, my interest, anybody listening to this. Why is it in our interest to challenge ourselves to get better as yoga teachers? Maybe, for example, in the art of communication, or in our studies, or in our environment, or in how we communicate, whatever. Why else might it be in our interest? And I explain to... let me share a true story. Imagine you have a young child, a 5-year-old child, and the child comes home and says, I want to sign up for yoga. I normally use the word ballet, but I use yoga here. So I want to do yoga. And so the child comes back, and after the first week of yoga, and what did you do this week? Well, we did this thing called the basics of yoga. Now, forgive my ignorance if I'm using language that's not aligned with, but you'll understand the context in which I'm using it. So what did you do this week? Well, we did a thing called the basics of yoga. Was it any good? It was amazing. I love yoga so much. So the following week, the child comes back. What did you do this week? Well, we did the basics, and we did this thing called a routine of yoga. And what did you think of it? Oh, it's amazing. Like, yoga is just, it's my world. I love it so much. A week later, the child comes back. What did you do this week? Well, we did the basics and we did the routine that we did last week. Oh, and what was it like? It was really good, really good. A week later, the child comes back. What did you do this week? Well, we did the basics and we did the routine that we did last week. And what was it like? Yeah, it was good. And a week later, the child comes back. What did you do this week? Well, we did the basics and we did the routine. And what was it like? Sure, it's yoga. Like, why do you keep asking me these questions? You know what it's like. Like, it's yoga. What's changed there, I believe, is that the growth has stopped because they keep doing the same routine. So unless we find ways to innovate, to grow, I think we're like flowers, right? Are growing or we're dying. Now, it's not as if we have to routine after routine after routine, but it could be a new way to do an old routine. It's something that challenges us, that there's growth in certain where maybe we get a new learning, and so if I'm going to spend as much time as I do in my speaking, in what I share, or anybody listening to this, I know if I'm growing, if I'm changing the routine of what I do, so I might still teach the same things I did 6-7 years ago, but I found new and improved ways to communicate them. So my happiness index, yes, my business will grow because I become more attractive to my clients. But the happiness I get, it's like the child, the happiness stopped because the growth stopped. Mm-hmm. So that's the extra reason why I believe it's in our interest to really challenge ourselves to become maybe the very best yoga teachers that we can possibly be.
Mm. Yeah, but the thing is though, with that evolution, is that there's going to be parts where you mess up. And what I've realised is I'm always changing or evolving what I'm teaching because I'm always learning new things. But the slight, well, don't even put it a downside, but I'll do something and I'll say, and I'm not that good at teaching because I'm only teaching it for the first time. So therefore if I taught the same thing every single week, I'd just be slick. I know what I'm saying. I'd be rolling off the tongue, but then it'd just roll off the tongue. But then it would sound a bit disingenuous, like a script, and going through the motions. I know people would show up, and that's fine. And there are many styles of yoga, I won't say which ones because people get offended, that do that. They just say it's the exact same poses, the exact same words every single week. But for me, I change how I move and what I learn about the body, and I want to share that with people. And I get excited about saying even things like, if you notice, if you turn your wrist this way instead of that way, this will happen. And that excites me.
There's a great example. It can be anything you see when you think about it. It like, that's a brilliant example because it's something that feels a little bit different to you. And I think our audiences will sense that as well. And they'll get that, gosh, this guy is so into this. Mm. Whereas if we keep doing the same old, and even this morning I was doing 2 sessions and I challenged myself to get to shake as many hands as possible because I was meeting people, and that felt uncomfortable. But that's a sign that I'm living true to the value, of because it felt uncomfortable. I was trying to just really give them my all. And one thing I used to just sit and wait to be introduced and then speak. But I've learned a great way to build a connection with the audience is go and try, if the opportunity is there, go and connect with them rather than just sit at the top as the expert or whatever. Go and get to know people, even if it's only for 5 seconds. Thanks for coming along. And if it challenges me, maybe it's all the more reason to do it. And maybe that's an example of me giving the very best I could this morning.
Yeah. Do you have, so that's a great example of setting yourself a variable that you want to, or a goal that you want to do, which is shaking people's hands. And it's almost like you need to have it to be measurable. So you can say, right, I did X amount and therefore, it may sound a bit, that's a funny example. Some people may be thinking, that sounds a bit odd, just trying to shake as many people's hands as possible. But sometimes you've got to do that, set those goals for yourself, because people will notice. It's like people coming out of the yoga room and okay, this person's asking you a question. Stand in front of them and look at them. Don't look at everyone else saying, see you, Kev, see you next week. Ignore them. This person's come up to you asking you about their wrist, for example. Just look directly at them and don't get distracted. And I'm thinking this in my head constantly because I'm still trying to figure out what the best way to create an environment where people feel like they're being seen, they're being listened to as well. So what I'm curious about, Gerry, is your rituals. So this is, say for example, the shaking hand thing is something, maybe you set that as a goal in this circumstance, but before you speak, do you do anything in terms of, like, okay, what I do, just to keep, so you know what I'm getting at, is I will sit in my car and I'll do 3 rounds of Wim Hof breathing, which is basically diaphragmatic breathing. Then I'll do 3 ohms, which is like that. And then I will, because I find it kind of gives me a more grounded voice as opposed to speaking up there, high up. And then from there, if I'm really feeling anxious, like with workshops, I still get very anxious. I'll stand in front of the mirror, I'll go to the toilet, and I'll just put my arms in the air and just look at myself in the mirror. And then I feel like it gives me more open body language. When I go into the room, I have a tendency to play with my hair, and people have told me that I just did it there. It kind of makes me look a bit like Laurel and Hardy, or like a monkey or something. So I'm conscious of where my hands are and what they're doing. So that's my ritual. Do you have anything like that, or am I the only weirdo?
I have 1 or 2 of that kind of ilk, and I have a couple of technical ones as well. Okay. So one of my rituals is 99% of the time, because obviously there's the odd time that this doesn't happen. I could be, like, I'm delivering a speaker school session this Saturday. I'll be in the room 2 hours before anybody else. 2 hours. For 2 reasons. I'm so excited to be doing it. And I don't see that as being an issue at all, being in the room 2 hours before. I will always be in a room an hour before. Always, because it's just one of the values I have. Even this morning, I was in the room an hour before and we had some technical issues, and there's nearly always, in what I do, there's nearly always technical issues, or just changing the environment. I might go into a room early, because the energy of the room, and I think how we set up a room is incredibly important. Like, so having been in hundreds of training rooms and seen every standard of presentations, I put huge emphasis on the layout of the room. So I might go in and just try and redesign it if I feel it needs redesigning, because I move around a lot, whereas some people here might be in the same environments all the time, maybe not. If I am, and I don't get nervous anymore, but with one exception. I was doing a talk about 5 months ago, and for whatever reason I did get nervous, and there was a couple of reasons why I believe that I did get nervous that particular day. It was a very cramped environment. There was 400 people in a very tight space, and I felt they were really on top. They were going to be really on top of me, and I love to have 4 or 5 or 6 feet in front of me, but there was going to be people like a foot away from me or 2 feet away from me. Wow. And it was a very hot room. The air conditioning wasn't working, and I was on first, and it was a very significant responsibility to kick off this day. And I was after being hired to do this 6 times by this new client, and about 10 minutes before, I just felt myself getting being nervous, I said, well, go and do the breathing technique that I needed when I first heard it 8 or 9 years ago. This was a game changer for me in terms of getting rid of nerves. And I'm familiar with the name Wim Hof, but I'm not familiar with the technical thing. But the breathing technique that I went out into the hallway for 2 minutes and it totally worked was I just went out and 4 or 5 times I breathed in for 4 seconds. I held my breath for 7 seconds and then I slowly exhaled for 11 seconds. I call it some people might be old enough to remember an aftershave called 4-7-11. So breathe in for 4, hold for 7 and exhale.
Okay.
And what I find is that calms me. So that was a game changer. I don't tend to do it anymore because I don't feel I need it. But one thing I did this morning, and some technical things I do, I will, because every presentation I do tends to be different. I always try and make it different anyway, but I very often I write brand new content for brand new challenges or just unique to this particular team or whatever it might be. So I very consciously, I could spend 8, 9, 10, 12 hours writing a 1 hour presentation, but I will need to consciously connect with, like, maybe an hour and a half before. I could do it in a coffee shop or I could do it just in a quiet corner in the room. I'll just go through the entire journey I'm about to bring them on and really, really focus on so that I'm very aware of what I'm doing at particular moments in time. So that's something I can't just stand up, open up and deliver. I want to be very consciously assured of the journey, the 9 points or the 3 directions that I'm bringing them in, and I'm doing this then, and I'm doing this exercise there, and then I'm going to get them to do that, and then I'm going to tell this story, whatever. So I really consciously dig in there in my own quiet time before I speak. And then the last thing I normally do, not always, but very often, is when I'm about to speak, just before I speak, I don't speak. And that's a strategy. Because it's such an unusual, particularly if we're trying it new, it's a courageous thing to do, is to stand up and not speak when people are waiting for you to speak. But I remember the first time I did it was in October 2013. I got this tip from somebody: don't speak, just stand up and smile. and speak when you're ready, not when they think not when they're ready, as in, yes, they're ready, but to wait for another 5 or 6 or 7 seconds. And the very first time I did it, I was quite nervous because it was a very particular reason why I was nervous, because at the time I felt this talk was a really big deal and I used this technique. And I walked out onto that stage, Kevin, very nervous. I stood up, I smiled from left to right, trying to make eye contact with every section of the room, which is another very valuable thing to do. Then I didn't speak for about 5 seconds and I could see people nudging. Why is he speaking? But inside my head was going, oh my gosh, that's such a courageous thing to do. And all the nerves disappeared because it challenged me to do it, but the growth I got from challenging myself. So I did that this morning as an example, and I could see people smiling. Gosh, why isn't he speaking? But that was an inner ritual that I do. It just grounded me. It really got me ready. It told me I was in total control of my environment in terms of my mind, the ability and the expertise and the value that I can bring to these people. I'm so confident in that this morning, I didn't even speak until I was ready. And then it flowed from there.
Well, that's fascinating. By the way, the second point you made, is that almost like a visualization technique? What you were talking about going through what was going to come up. Is that would you describe, would you visualize in your head what you're going to be, how you're going to be saying it and where you're going to be standing and stuff like that? Do you do that?
Well, 2 reasons. Number one, because I'm a very visual person. Yes, that's but also I've dozens and dozens and dozens of stories or activities that I do, and every talk I do, I go to the resources and I design a brand new presentation. So chances are I've never given this exact presentation. I could have told a story that I'm about to tell in my opening. I could have told that in the middle of something yesterday because it made more sense there. So I don't tend to ever stand up and give the same presentation twice. So it's more to, do you remember now, you're not telling that story here, and here's why you're going to tell that story 3 minutes before you finish. So just to consciously just reconnect with the technical aspects of what I'm about to do as well.
And it's funny though, that's, as you said, every talk you give is almost unique, and that's probably what makes them sound so authentic. But you're a public speaking expert, but ironically, sometimes the most influence you can have is by not speaking. And you mentioned earlier about this guy who lost you in 30 seconds because he said 3 things you have to do, or 3 options that you had. And how we often get told in yoga teaching that when you shouldn't just be constantly speaking, you should allow for pauses. but what's fascinating about the third point you made is that to not speak at the start, because I think I do this by accident because I think sometimes I come across as a little bit dopey. I'm not I come across that way, but I don't think I am. But when I'm teaching, I often stand in front of the class and I look around a little bit, and then I'm like, okay, right, everyone. But that's actually, and I think some people are like, is this guy the teacher or what? Or has he just stood up to say something? But I think that that's a brilliant tip for people that are thinking about how can they be better communicators. And it's actually, ironically, it's not by always speaking, because some people think that, oh, I've got the gift of the gab, so therefore I'm a good communicator. But when you speak less, the words that you say then have more weight.
Pausing is...
Now we're consciously pausing, aren't we?
Sure, but pausing, I believe, is one of the most powerful things you can do to really maybe get a message across. And however, there's a caveat. If we overdo it, it loses its value. So, I've learned something I do often is I will whisper the most important part of my presentation.
Yeah.
Because we think, well, we need to shout to be heard. I've learned it's the opposite. If you really want to draw people in, the value of whispering is so powerful. Yeah. And I've literally seen people move forward. But the value of a pause, let me give you a simple example. And you and I were chatting about public speaking earlier on, and I shared a quote from George Bernard Shaw. So I'm going to read out a quote from George Bernard Shaw. And I'll do this on Saturday at the Speaker School class. And I will pause in the middle of the quote. Now, the conventional wisdom will say, sure, I'll just give them the quote. But it's not about giving the quote, it's about giving a quote that resonates. So what if there was part of the quote that you really wanted to resonate, to maybe put those words up in lights? One example of how we put the word up in lights, and in this quote there's one key word, and I'm going to try and put it up in lights. So what I'm going to do is, just before I give you the most important word in the quote, I'm going to pause. And I'd like to think that if I do this on Saturday, people will be even more eager. Whereas if I just read it out and I don't highlight this key important word, they might get it, but I'd be confident they will really get it because of the way I deliver it. Mm-hmm. So here's the quote, George Bernard Shaw. The problem with communication is the illusion that the communication has taken place.
Yes.
The key word there is, he will tell you that, it's not about, when you're communicating, it's not about you communicating, it's about your audience understanding. Because if they don't understand it, we're not really communicating, are we? So there's an example. I really want the audience to get that word illusion. So I will put it up in lights. How I put up in lights is by pausing. It's one, like there's hundreds of things we can do as speakers, but that's one great example.
Well, I know it's slightly different, but look at someone like Obama. When he would those, I think they call it pregnant pauses. He would stop, look around, and then it's slightly different because there's a different audience, and But when I referenced earlier, this is actually what we're tapping into now, and I'm conscious of your time, Gerry. But what I want to tap into just is tone, because you're talking about whispering certain things. When you go to, say, some forms of yoga where it's the same thing over and over again, what tends to happen is exactly that. Everything goes up at the end. Everything goes up at the end, and lift your arms, and now do this, and everything is going up, and it loses any. I hate that word, authenticity, but your mind shuts out. It's almost like it becomes like this droning sound, and you can't hear anything. Have you? In terms of speech, so public speaking is one thing, it's talking about confidence and stuff, but what would you call the skill of addressing the tone of your voice, the frequency of the words you use? Is that like speech therapy or something?
Oh, is it speech therapy? I think it's speech, what's the word I might use? It could be speech craft, might be a word that I might use.
Have you like, do you have someone who is like Or have you had someone in the past who's like a speech coach for you?
Yes.
That
Yes.
teaches you stuff like this?
Most definitely. And I study other speakers. I love watching videos of really powerful, impactful presentations. So
Yeah.
simple example would be, I very often go into YouTube and I'll Google Toastmasters World Champions, and you're guaranteed to see great speaking there. But the tone we speak, if all the words sound the same, George Bernard Shaw will say there's the illusion that they've got it, So I believe we need to put the most important words up in lights, or the most important technique up in lights. And one way we might do that is by varying our tone. So making the keywords sound and therefore feel different and much more likely to resonate, to sink in with the audience. So it might be, here's a simple example. So, let me try and I'm going to give you a dialogue all in the same tone.
Yeah.
So one of the key messages, here's one of my key messages today that I really believe this, and this has come 16 years of opening my own business and really trying to change my life in the last 24 years. And what I've discovered is our success in life is determined by how uncomfortable you and I are prepared to get. Now that's all delivered in the same tone. Mm-hmm. Here's another way that I might do it now. 24 years. In 24 years of my own experience in terms of personal development, if I've learned one thing, and if you were to only get one key message, here it is. Our success in life is determined by et cetera, and that's the key line. So everything else is just to support that, but that's the one I most want them to remember. So if you take that out and put in a really important technical thing that we're teaching in yoga, is to just maybe allow a difference in your tone there to really highlight it. And you might even follow it up with, listen, what I've just showed you there, it's so important, I'd like to say it again.
Yeah.
And give it to them a second time, because if that's the one thing you want them to remember, the other words are just supporting that. So how we say something is every bit as important, in many ways maybe even more important than what we say. Mm-hmm. How we say it. It's that ability to just, where people really get the message.
Yeah. I'm pausing now. Actually, funny enough, that I love Joe Rogan. I noticed Joe Rogan will let the guest finish and then he'll stop and actually not say anything. And I'm going to try and do that more often. But and Gerry, again, I am conscious of your time, but I think this is so important. I think that your voice, it all goes back to, it's not about you. It's about we, the person coming into they've driven God knows and how much traffic, they've paid for parking, they've gone to your class, they could have done something else at the evening, but they chose to come to your class, and then it's up to you to create an experience. And part of that experience is the words you use and how you use them. And I really feel that this is an area that if people are looking to if this is something that you're aware of, or maybe ask yourself, could I improve in this area, which I'm sure we all can, and how am I going to do that? Because it's going to make not just teaching yoga, i.e. your craft better, but your life better.
So I've taken up a new activity myself in terms of fitness in the last 5 months, something that's very new to me. So I'm going to this gym and I have to say I'm loving it. But it's around strength training, which is something that's very new to me. It's not something that I have any expertise in whatsoever. So I'm back in kindergarten. And so I'm going into this environment every day, and there's people at all levels in the same class. And the people who own it, they're wonderful people. But because they're giving out very technical information, and just me as a student, I'm very slow to process information, and lots of time, and they're wonderful people, and he really does try and help me, and it gives me extra help or whatever. But when he's giving out communication, even when it's one-to-one, I love when people say to me, listen, what's your understanding about that? And because if I'm asked that, I might be able to say, well, here's what I'm hearing, or let me show you. Whereas what we very often tend to do is just give out all this communication and then just leave people. And we assume, sure, they must have got it. Sure, I told them the 4 things that they needed to do. And then we go off and we might go off and look at other students and whatever. But just that simple. And I appreciate this is not a one size fits all and whatever. But it's just that maybe checking in with your clients, what's their understanding of the communication. You might be astounded at the answers you get. And you might say, but how could they possibly have got that meaning from it? But as a student myself now, very often I'm filtering it through my view of the world. And you said the line, it's not about you, it's about the audience. And it is always about the audience, never about us as teachers. So that's one thing I'm tell me what's your understanding of that. That's something I ask the audience a lot of in my work is, what's your thoughts on that? I'm sharing it with you, what do you think? Or what's your understanding of that? And it's that 360 that guarantees that we find out the truth, whether it's a communication that has landed or it's an illusion that it's landed by getting that feedback.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think it's being open to creating that dialogue between you and the student, because what people tend to do, and it's very lazy, is do X, Y, Z. Do you understand? Yes. What does that tell you? Yeah. Nothing.
Versus what's your understanding of this?
Yeah, exactly.
And funny, if I went to the gentleman who owns that particular thing and I asked him last week, I said, listen, I'll be gladly pay for this. I said, you're given incredible knowledge here and expertise. Did you ever think of recording videos? And he said, now that you mention it, he said, yes, that's definitely going to happen. I would love, because he was teaching this thing last week, and there was so much technical in it, and yet I was doing it for the very first time. There's only so much I was able to, because he was giving a lot of information, but I only remembered one maybe of the 4 things. But I'm very eager, so I asked him, and he said, absolutely. So that's I'll be the first student to sign up for those videos, because I've become so passionate about it. I really want to go home and I want to study it, break it down, and then practice at home in my kitchen kind of thing, But
that's the key, Gerry. I mean, to always be a student, to be an eternal student. Then the people who are the best or most effective teachers are the ones that always want to be students and constantly refining their craft. Gerry, I'm really conscious that we've gone over the time I said we were going to be. It's 3:05. I don't want to keep you much longer. I could talk to you all day, but if people want to find out more about you, where do they go?
They go, well, if you go to Google and just type in Gerry Duffy, I think Gerry Duffy Academy should pop up. And if people are interested just to say hello or give us feedback on this, or if there's anything I can help them with, I'm very easy to find. Just pop me an email. I am absolutely passionate about public speaking. I find myself doing it when I've nothing to do. I'll go and I'll read something or watch something. So that's a sign, that it's something I love. So if somebody has a question or something, I would love to, if they felt I'd value to be able to help them in that. Please reach out, and I'm very easy to find, just gerryduffyacademy.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gerry. Thanks so much for listening. This podcast was brought to you by Small Changes, organic, eco-friendly whole food store based here in Drumcondra, Dublin 9. Pop along, support a zero waste ethos by getting yourself some refillable products or maybe some fruit and veg. And if you'd like to come to one of my workshops, then I have Heels Overhead on December 14th, which is going to be in Salt and Salt. So you can check out their website and book directly with them, or feel free to reach out to me, kevinboyyoga.ie, with any questions you may have about that workshop. That's it for now. I think this is one of the best podcasts I've had the pleasure of experiencing. So I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, feel free to share it with your friends on your IG stories or leave a review on iTunes. Thanks as always so much for listening, and I'll catch up with you next week.